hello, Stephen.
Hello. Hello,
Hello.
Richard.
Hello. How are you?
Very good, thank you. Very good indeed.
Good. Been busy?
I'm always busy. I like to be busy. I like to always have a few balls up in the air at the same time.
Mm.
Different styles of music, different artists, different projects, So I've got the podcast, I've got my career doing mixes of, classic records, and I've got my own music, which in itself has, as you know, has different strands. So it's a very active and very full and very complete. And I have my family as well, so
Yeah,
very active,
yeah, exactly.
very,
Which
very
is what?
complete life. Yeah.
Two children and a couple of dogs.
So my
And
wife,
your wife.
yeah, don't forget my wife,
Yeah.
my two stepdaughters and two doggies. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Wow. Okay, so quite a handful.
Yeah,
Quite a
but they're
lot on
all,
your plate.
yeah, they're all lovely. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
So, um, yeah, before we go into base communion, which is what we're going to centre on, but the podcast, how are they doing? Because I'm an avid follower of your podcast, and I I hate it, as I've said to you before in an email, because you're one of those people that you're so enthusiastic about music and all kinds of stuff. I end up making notes of things to check out. For example, I think your latest one, Steve Miller, mind you, that didn't work for me. So
No, not even the first track, "Songs
at
for
the
Our Ancestors."
beginning of it,
Oh,
and then
that's so
it was
interesting.
just too cloying for me after a while. So
Okay.
I
Well,
did
you know
try
what?
it, but how are they
Yeah,
doing anyway?
well, you're not the only one. It has it really has a strong fan base now, which is amazing. I mean, it's just two nerds talking about music, and as you say, just enthusing about music, being very passionate about music.
Mm,
And I think our whole brief to ourselves at the very beginning was, let's not talk about the canon albums, the albums that have been discussed ad infinitum, because
mm,
the episode you're talking about, 1968, of course,
yeah,
the White Album came out that year. Electric Ladyland came out that year. But these
yeah,
are albums that have been discussed ad infinitum. As far as I'm concerned, there's nothing left to say about those records.
of
So
course.
we want to talk about other albums that perhaps people aren't you so ubiquitous, that people aren't so familiar with.
Mm,
And of course, the downside of that is that some people are going to go away and listen to those records and say, well, what the fuck are they talking about? This is awful.
yeah,
But the point is that we're very honest and we're very genuine. We're very selfish about the way we talk about these records. These are records that we are very passionate about. One of the record that we're most passionate about from 1968, which is on an episode that hasn't been broadcast yet, is
mm.
the Marble Index by Nico.
Oh, brilliant album. Yeah,
Yes, it is, but it's definitely a minority appeal album.
yeah, yeah,
It's one of those albums that people will like. Most people will probably think it's horrendous. It's like but the people that like it are obsessively, passionate about it.
yeah, yeah,
We're in that category. So I think it's doing really well. People are curious, and I think the best testament to it really is what you say, is that we're sending people out to search down these albums that are not the obvious classic rock I get so bored with people discussing the same 100 to
yeah,
200 albums from history over and over and over again.
yeah.
There
Of
is
course.
nothing left. There's nothing left to say about Dark Side of the Moon. There
No,
is nothing left to say about Sergeant Pepper.
Mojo will find
Or,
something to say.
or, I know that's the crazy thing. It's endlessly rotating front
Yeah,
cover. Dark Side of the Moon anniversary, then it's Sergeant Pepper anniversary, then it's the Stone Roses debut, then it's Nevermind. And I'm
yeah,
bored of reading about those albums. So I
yeah,
think Tim felt the same. And that was kind of the starting point. Let's do a podcast where we talk about the albums that get overlooked in these sort of
yeah,
classic
yeah,
rock.
yeah.
In many ways, they're just as good to us anyway,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
not better. If not
Kudos
better.
to you. I think you're both doing a really good job. Very well. Obviously, if you're interested in music like I am, and obviously like all your listeners are, then you're doing a great job. I think so. At the risk of sounding sycophantic, I think it's absolutely wonderful. It's
Well, thank you. I
always
mean,
always good listening.
we just have fun, and we don't sort of try and contrive in any way to appeal to a certain demographic. These are just things that we are passionate about, and we just bicker and talk about them. And obviously,
Yeah,
sometimes we
yeah,
disagree as well.
yeah,
Sometimes
yeah.
we disagree, and that creates,
Oh, it's
people love
great.
people love a row, So that all kind of adds, and of course, the beauty of it is that the audience will also agree and disagree
Yeah,
with
yeah,
our viewpoint. some people say to me, "Oh, I listen to your podcast. I definitely more on Tim's side than yours," and
Yeah,
then other people will be the other way around. So
that's
that's
right.
all that's all part of the appeal of it too, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Is it? Do you have Again, I will go on to base communion in a minute, but do you have some young listeners as well, or is it all old fogies like me?
No, we do. I mean, the thing is with, with podcasts, you do get all the statistics, which breaks down your
Yeah,
demographic,
yeah,
country, gender, and I mean, it is predominantly male, but has to be sort of
yeah. I'm
85%
sure.
male.
Yeah.
But in terms of age group, there's a definite peak, between 35 and 50.
Okay.
Um, but I would say that we do get a pretty good spread right across the board. Yeah.
Okay. Oh, nice. That's great.
Surprising. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, best of luck with that, and I'm going to continue listening to it as and when they're broadcast. Disappointed with the latest one on YouTube because there was, as many people complained about, there was no visual aspect, no
Yeah, we did.
video.
Well, we only started doing a visual with the previous one. We're going to do the next one, but we had to squeeze this one in between other commitments. We didn't have time
Oh,
to
I
arrange
see. Okay.
filming. Yeah, no, the filming will come back on the next one for
Okay,
sure.
brilliant. Um, to go on to base communion related matters now.
Mm.
Obviously, base communion is a product of your interest. Like you just said, you're interested in all kinds of different music, but you're also interested in electronic music. Where did that come from initially? Where did this interest come from in electronic music?
Well, the funny thing is that bass communion, I understand why you would describe it as electronic, because
Mm,
the processing is all electronic, but actually
mm,
most of the source material is not electronic. It's mostly taking recordings of real instruments and finding ways to twist them into new shapes.
mm,
So that was one of the early things that I was interested in. And I think the answer to your question is that came from, first of all, it came from being very curious as a young, precocious, even preteen in some cases, going
mm.
down to I mean, you'll remember the days, Richard, when you used to be able to go and get records out from the library.
I never
And
did that myself, but
well, I
yeah.
did. And I
Mm,
and I discovered a lot of things by going to my local library in Hemel Hempstead, where I grew up,
mm,
and just finding things that looked weird, or that looked interesting, or that piqued my curiosity in some way. Now, that could be the cover. It could be just a list of the instruments that we used on the back of the cover,
mm,
or it could be something that just appealed to me conceptually. Like I remember going down and taking out a lot of Stockhausen records from my
mm,
local library and reading on the back about how he was experimenting with surround sound. And this is in the
mm.
50s,
That's right. Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
so you had pieces like Gruppen and Carre, which were for multiple groups of musicians
Mm.
positioned around in an auditorium,
That's
positioned
right. Yeah,
around in
yeah,
the audience. Yeah.
yeah. I've got
And
those records.
yeah. So I mean, this is proto surround sound
Yeah,
in the
yeah,
1950s.
absolutely.
Talk about being ahead of the game. I
Oh,
mean,
yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And those things would always just make me interested, make you kind of pique my curiosity. And I would take the record on home, take the record home, and I would listen to it. And sometimes I would be confused.
Mm,
Sometimes I would be disappointed. Sometimes I would fall in love with it straight away. But I think the point is that for me, it was all part of the process of being a student of what's out there. What is out there? What is out there on the periphery that I'm not hearing in the
mm,
top 40 rundown,
mm.
or I'm not seeing in my local hour price records racked in the new releases or the record.
Okay.
What is out there? And we're talking about the early 80s here. And it's interesting because I think now we exist in an era where actually all music is pretty much available to us pretty easily.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
Even even the most obscure experimental underground private press music, you can probably
yeah,
find
yeah, yeah.
probably
Yeah.
find it on YouTube. But we're talking about an era here where even something like, I mean, the story I tell, often is about finding Captain Beefheart's Troutmouse replica and the mission I went on to hear that
Mm,
record. Again, we're talking early 80s here. It wasn't in print as a
mm,
vinyl. It
mm,
had yet to be released on CD. the only way I could find it was by ordering a very expensive American import copy, and I waited months for it to arrive.
I can
And
well imagine.
I spent probably three times more than I would have spent on any other vinyl record at the time. But I was curious because I'd read so much about this record. I'd read Julian Cope evangelizing about it. I'd heard Frank Zappa was somehow involved in it, and that made me interested.
Mm-mm.
And I'd read a lot of other sort of indie bands from the time talking about this record. So I was very curious. And I finally got this expensive American import home and I put it on and I hated it. I hated it.
Oh, okay.
Because it's when you first listen to it, you almost have to rewire um your entire the way you kind of engage with music. You almost have to rewire your entire brain
Yeah,
because
yeah, yeah.
it doesn't obey any of the rules or parameters of rock music or blue
Mm.
or anything really. But the point is this, because I'd spent so much time and money and effort finding this record, I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to
Okay.
give up after one listen.
Of course.
And I listened two, three, four times, and then finally, of course, it clicked. And now I consider it one of the great, masterpieces of music.
Yeah.
So the point I'm making here is that I think that nowadays, with everything being so easily available, you kind of forget that discovering music sometimes was a process that took
Mm.
years and years and years. And actually, there are still things I'm hearing for the first time that I've
Oh,
kind of been
yeah, yeah.
all my life, and only now I'm kind of discovering and engaging with, and I like that. My life of listening to music has been, in some ways, a lifelong search which continues, and that's all born out of curiosity. I don't know if I've answered your question, but that's
I
the
I
point.
think you kind of got off a couple of tangents, but no,
Well, I
but you
have, and
have, but you
I
have.
do, I do that. But I think the
Don't
answer to
worry,
your
it's good.
the answer to your question, Richard, is that the way I discovered electronic music or avant-garde music or experimental music
Mm.
was by A, being curious about what was beyond, what was out on the periphery, and B, being able to take these records out of my local library and take a
Mm.
chance on stuff that just looked weird or interesting in some
Yeah,
way.
yeah. You were fortunate. I don't. I belong to the local library, but I don't remember there being a section of records. I keep hearing about these mythical music sections of libraries. To me, they sound mythical. So I never saw it in Canterbury or my
Really?
local. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
Unless I was just overlooking it. But I wasn't interested in music until punk came along, really. And then, so unlike you, I was absolutely anti-music almost until punk happened. Um,
right.
so in a way, that kind of limited my attraction to music for a few years because I had to go through the kind of punk filter. So
Right.
I'm jealous of people like you know, having found Captain Beefheart
Well,
or
that one I had to buy.
Stockhausen.
I didn't find that in my library, but I
No,
definitely
no, but
my local library, they definitely had a lot of 20th century classical music, so stuff like
yeah, yeah.
Berio, Xenakis, Ligeti, Stockhausen, and they also had a lot of very strange. I mean, I don't know, maybe there was some weirdo that worked at my local library that they had a lot of
Yeah.
a lot of very strange electronic music. Like I remember getting Walter Carlos's Sonic Seasonings out of the library.
Mm.
I remember getting Einstein on the Beach, Philip Glass out of the library, this
Brilliant.
4
Yeah.
LP box set.
Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah, I've got that.
all of the, and they had a lot of Miles Davis records, and
Brilliant.
so all of this stuff was, to someone like me at the age of 12 or 13, was like, I want to eat this. I want to eat this all up, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, yeah.
I want to experience this all. And so that kind of start, and I always say that the search for music is like one door opening to another, isn't it? So
Of course it is. Yeah.
you get into someone like Brian Eno, and then Brian Eno starts talking about cluster or can.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you go and buy a cluster or a can record, and then you find out that that's all part of a scene called quote unquote kraut rock, and
Yeah,
there are
yeah,
other
exactly.
bands like Faust
Yeah.
and more obscure, and then so you walk through that door,
Absolutely. So
and
that's how it,
I'm still
yeah,
doing
yeah.
that.
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, I would say that's how it worked for me as well. But again, I'd be reading interviews with people that had come out the punk scene.
Yeah.
And I did, and I got into Captain Beefheart because I think Robert Smith was talking about Captain Beefheart being a huge influence. So that was my entry point to those doors, to these new corridors that would open up. So, but to go back to you though, obviously um, okay, I'll accept the fact bass communion isn't predominantly electronic music, but you did start out with a project that, if I remember what I read correctly, and this is based on what I was reading from Alan Ryder's recent interview, you were using some electronic devices made by your father for a project called Altamont when you were also around 14, 15 years old. And
Yeah.
this seems to channel exactly what you were saying, like cluster, harmonia,
Yeah.
um, tangerine
Conrad,
dream.
yeah, Conrad Schnitzler,
Yeah, yeah,
Ka-Spel.
yeah,
Yeah.
all of that. So, so this interest in electronic music has been a big thing, and I accept the fact that um, you're saying that Bass Communion is a project that uses electronics to process different
Yes.
sounds and whatever.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
I'm being slightly pedantic because obviously it is electronic because it couldn't this music couldn't be made without computers and without electronic processing. But
mm,
actually to call it electron when you say electronic music, I immediately think of stuff like Ortega or Aphex Twin, stuff.
okay, yeah, yeah,
And so they're using electronic, devices to create electronic sound. And so I'm taking a lot of, I mean, like the piece on the new record that is just based on the tape hiss, sound of
yeah,
tape hiss.
yeah.
So taking that as a starting point and trying to turn it into something beautiful by processing it through electronic music. So I'm being a little bit pedantic because there are electronics, obviously a lot of electronic processing involved,
Mm,
but most of the pieces start off with piano, or other sort of audio anomalies. Particularly this record is all based around taking, the imperfections of analog sound and
yeah, yeah, yeah.
twisting it into new shapes. Yeah.
So yeah, we'll go on to that in a minute. But
Yeah.
I thought Bass Communion, I thought the early albums by Bass Communion were based on that concept, and then you went somewhere else afterwards. So I'm obviously wrong there.
Not necessarily. No, I mean you are right. I mean, to be honest, every album has taken a different starting point, really.
Mm,
As sort of has used a different starting point. So for me, it's like, what's the reason to make another record? That's always the thing with me. And I have this, not just with Bass Communion, I have this generally throughout my career. What reason is there to make another record? What can I do that's different to all the other records I've made? So in this case, the starting conceit or concept was taking those audio anomalies, audio imperfections like hiss, wow, flutter, distortion, turning that into glitches, turning that into some music. Some of the other records have been based on choral recordings, for example,
that's right. Yeah.
taking, taking the recordings of choirs and boy choirs and
Mm,
using them as a starting point. Other albums have been based on the sound of the piano. An album called Ghosts on Magnetic Tape, which is probably the most well known
yeah,
of the,
yeah.
is all based on recordings of piano, a little upright piano I had in my studio, but I still have
Mm,
it.
okay.
So not just the sound of the piano, but also the sound that the wood makes, the creaking, all of those
Yeah, yeah,
things.
yeah. So the
So
external kind of, or
yeah,
the innards as well. Yeah,
yeah. So so
yeah.
yeah, exactly the inners. So there is a sort of continuity in the sense of being fascinated with the sort of the byproducts, if you like, of making music. These external sounds, these extraneous sounds
Mm,
that actually a lot of people spend a lot of time and money trying to erase from their music.
that's right. Yeah.
um, and the squeaks, the sound of the hammers on the piano strings, all of that stuff. So that was all part. So there's another example of an album that was kind of based on a particular. This is going to be an album based on the sounds that you can make using a piano in all of its
Mm-mm.
myriad ways. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So, um, maybe this is a good place to talk about the new album. Actually, firstly, the title, the itself of itself. What does that refer to? Because
Because it is
it's quite ambiguous.
Well, okay. So, I'll tell you what it means to me.
Mhm.
Firstly, I like the fact it's ambiguous. I always, I'm always slightly reluctant to explain what things mean
Yeah,
to
yeah,
me
sure. I appreciate
because
that.
in a way, you're
You
kind of
don't have
robbing
to.
people of, but okay. I'll say this. At this stage in my career, I'm not interested in making generic music. And there's a reason why it's been 12 years since the last bass communion, um, all new bass communion record.
Mhm.
Some collaboration. There's a reason for that, and that is that I looked around me and I looked around at the world of experimental music, and I just thought, there's too much. There's too much of it, and so much of it is generic, and so much of it is just one guy with his looping pedal,
Mhm.
thinking that he can create a 20-minute guitar soundscape, and that everyone else should hear that. And I don't mean to belittle this other music, and people may well listen to this music and feel the same way. But the point I'm making is this, that I think the world of experimental music, partly because of the means to make this kind of music, is available to everyone now very easily. You
Mhm.
can you can have on a laptop a few plugins you can download from the internet, and you can start to twist and mutate and process sound and create quote unquote experimental drone music, experimental ambient music very, very easily.
Yeah.
And you can create it by the yard, and people do.
I know they
And
do. I receive
and
loads of it.
yeah, and everyone, because it's human nature to think that everything you do should be heard by other people, and it's human nature to want to see yourself reflected back in the mirror of somebody else listening to what you've created or experiencing what you've created. So consequently, sites like Bandcamp now are full of ambient, drone, experimental, electronic, dark ambient, industrial,
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it. It's full of this kind of music that can be made essentially by people who have no musical knowledge.
People like me, yeah, yes.
And I don't say that in a demeaning way, because I have very limited musical education too, and I don't think it's a prerequisite at all.
Mhm.
In fact, I believe some of the worst music ever made has been made by trained musicians. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah, yeah.
so
Okay.
I don't mean that in a derogatory,
I go along with that, yeah. So,
but I think the point I'm making is this, that because technology now has facilitated anyone, regardless of musical training, to be able to generate music at a terrifically fast rate and upload it onto the internet for other people to experience, that it has become a very crowded place. And it's sometimes hard to find the really special music amongst all the noise, pardon the pun.
yeah,
And yeah, go on.
but would you not level that same argument about all kinds of music? Because I think we live in times where you can hear there's this oversaturation of everything. So
Yes,
it's good and
totally.
bad, yeah, because there's some good stuff out there. There's still people producing good stuff. I laughed when you said about the guy with the looper pedal or whatever, because my wife saw William Basinski on Monday evening in Krakow, and
Mm.
the support was a guy with a guitar and a
And
loop.
a loop
Yeah,
pedal.
yeah,
Yeah, well, okay.
yeah.
No, you
So,
you you're absolutely right. There is a proliferation of music, period.
mm,
An over proliferation of music, period. Um, and you only have to see the sort of figures that Spotify produced, where they have something, or at least a few years ago, maybe even more now, something like 120,000 songs get added to Spotify every day.
mm,
It's ridiculous. It's
yeah, yeah.
ridiculous. Now, when I was growing up, there was maybe 7 or 8 new albums would be released every week.
Mm,
And there might be one or two that you were really interested in. So it was a big, every week was an event. There'd be a new album by such and such, The Cure, or a new album by whoever. And it was a big. Now there are something like 20,000 albums released every Friday.
yeah, yeah, yeah. It's
And
crazy.
some of them are just released on Bandcamp, okay, and have, 5 people will listen to them, and that's okay. And that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think the point I'm making is that because this kind of music actually requires probably the least amount of conventional musical knowledge of all to create industrial noise or ambient music, all you really need to do is have an ear for creating textures and
Mm,
sound.
mm.
You don't have to fashion them into songs. You don't have to write lyrics. So I think even if there's a proliferation of music in general, there is even more of a proliferation when it comes to ambient noise, drone, experimental music. There just is.
Right.
There
Okay.
just
So in many ways, you've answered a question I want, that I had for you regarding this 12-year gap. I think it's 12 years since
Mm,
the last Base Communion album.
yeah.
And obviously you reached a point where you're perhaps a little disillusioned where with perhaps where you could go next, how to follow Cenotaph, or with the kind of, for want of a better word, scene that Base Communion's considered part of, which is that kind of experimental electronic, um, avant-garde, noise, whatever, ambient scene. So I've just got a warning here, about 10 minutes left.
Mhm.
Okay, so I need to pay attention. So um, I had a question bubbling away then, but yes, so
Well, you asked me earlier why is the title the itself of itself, and
yeah,
I've kind of been I've managed to go off at another tangent as
yeah,
I'm always
yeah.
wont to do, but I want to circle back to that. So the reason I've selected this selection of pieces, and these pieces were made over a very long period of time, and they're taken from a very large pool of work I've created,
Mm,
most of which I feel is not worth releasing, and the ones I've picked are the ones that I think I've not heard much else quite like this, or I've not heard anything quite like this. Now, I don't want to say there isn't that kind of thing out there because obviously I haven't heard everything. So there
mm,
may well be somebody else doing exactly the same thing. But to my ears, and I spend a lot of time listening to this kind of music, these pieces have something that is unique about them, something special about them, and something that doesn't sound like most of the other music I hear out there in this particular genre or this scene. So
mm.
I've selected these pieces, and they are what they are. They are what they are. They're unapologetically what they are. So this album is itself of itself.
Okay. Uh,
It's what it is, and I don't even know what it is. I don't
uh,
know what it is anymore.
okay, right. Okay. So,
I don't know
yeah.
what it is. You tell me, what is it?
Well,
Is it ambient music? Is it
no,
noise
no.
music?
Well,
I don't
there,
know what it is.
there are two tracks on the album that are definitely ambient, that can be placed in that
Right,
category if anyone must, if anyone
right.
feels compelled to. The
Yeah.
rest of it, obviously, I'm releasing this album, I think is very what I would call difficult listening in a way.
Yeah, it
And I
is.
think, I think a lot of people, and this is another thing that you do, Steve, and I think you're very good at kind of, um, I don't think, I'm not sure if you do it deliberately. I don't think you want to alienate people that are following all your work. But I think a lot of people who've perhaps paid attention to Base Communion over the years are going to be surprised by this album.
Yeah,
And,
I think.
and maybe that's the key. You just want to keep, you know, it's the idea of keeping things fresh and but I do
Yeah,
think people are going to be challenged by this album.
they are. They are. Yeah, and I think some people are probably going to not like it at all, and that's okay. That's okay. I don't mind people not liking this music as long as they don't try and tell me that I've done something wrong by making a record they don't
Yeah,
like.
yeah.
That's when I have a problem with so-called listeners, is they try and tell me that I've made a bad record because they don't like it, because I've gone in a direction that doesn't kind of chime with what they like, and that's fine. That's fine.
Mm-mm-mm.
Um, I like the idea that perhaps there will be people that will listen to this record that wouldn't normally listen to this kind of music, that might find their way into it. We were talking earlier about the doors leading to other doors, an
Yeah,
artist
yeah,
you
yeah. Of
find
course.
introducing you to something, almost being the Trojan horse in that sense, a sort of
Mhm.
sneaking music under. I always say the best example I can give of this is the Revolution 9 on the White Album, which by any stretch of the imagination is not a particularly good example of the genre, but it is a piece of musique concrète on
Yeah,
an album by the biggest selling band in
yeah,
history.
yeah, yeah.
And so many people will have heard musique concrète by virtue of buying the White Album. And some of them, not many, I grant you, but some of those people might have been interested enough to go off and listen to where that music comes from.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
So I always think to myself, maybe there's a small part of my audience that maybe listen to my rock-based albums or my progressive albums or whatever. They're going to buy this because it's by me, and they're going to find something they weren't expecting, but they might be surprised themselves to discover that it does appeal to them.
Yeah.
And so that's as much as I can ever hope for, I think, really. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah. So um, in relation to this, to what you're saying about how long it's taken to release this new album, to put this material together, are you are you inspired to do more bass communion at the moment, or are you? Yeah, are we going to have to wait another 12 years until you're almost 70? You know.
I don't know. You know what? I really don't know. I might never make another album. I think this, as I say, this is drawn from about 12 years of making music,
Yeah.
mostly for myself, mostly in a very indulgent way. And I've pulled a few pieces together I think are interesting and are different and have some sense of uniqueness about them in, as I say, in this field of
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
very overpopulated field of experimental music. And you know what? That may be the last time I do that. I have no idea. I don't feel any pressure to make more music as Bass Communion. It's not like it's a massive commercial gravy train for me.
No, of
So
course not.
it is a labor of love, and again, the title kind of reflects that, the itself of itself. It is what it is. In my professional career, it is what it is. It was always a labor of love, and it continues to be a labor of love. And if anything, it's becoming more obtuse as
Mm.
time goes, and as you say, more difficult as time goes on. So I don't know. If everyone hates this record, then I may feel like, okay, I'll just keep it to myself from now on. Let's I had fun doing it. I enjoy it, but let's see what
Yeah,
people.
yeah, of course. So, uh, yeah, but oh God, I had another question bubbling away there. Um, so, yeah, yeah. Obviously, you work in two spheres. You work in, you know, I've said this to you before, and you countered that by saying you work in many spheres. But I think you misunderstood me. What I meant was that you work in this sphere with Base Communion and some other projects in a kind of underground sphere, and you're very much part of the mainstream with your other projects and groups. Yeah, with Porcupine Tree and your solo work, whether by default or design, you're there, you know. So, which area, if you had to choose, are you more comfortable with? You know, are
So
you? Yeah, are you more comfortable with the mainstream, or you don't care? What are you more comfortable doing? This kind of low profile Base Communion type work. Obviously, it doesn't pay, like your, as you said, the gravy train of the big rock groups and whatever. But where do you feel, yeah, more comfortable?
Well, I think the simple answer to that question is that the the whole appeal for me is by definition the fact that I have all these different things. So let me explain what I mean by that. So if I only had one of these things, if I only had making rock albums or pop albums, or if I only had the remix work I do, or if I only had the podcast, or if I only had the Bass Communion, if I was just only a part of this experimental sort of subterranean world, I think I would be frustrated in any of those contexts if
Uh,
that was the only thing I did. So,
okay.
so the answer to your question is I have to have all of these
Yeah,
things
yeah.
to be satisfied. And again, this all comes back to my natural curiosity about all the different sounds, all the different styles, all the different sounds, all the different approaches, all the different things you can do in the name of musical expression. To
Mm-hmm.
me, it's all this wonderful paint box. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like just being told you can only paint in red, or you can only paint in blue, or you can only paint in black and white. Well, the thing I love the most is I get to paint in all these different colors all the time simultaneously.
Like, but and again, I'm repeating myself here. I've
Yeah.
mentioned this in emails, but you you're quite unique in that respect. I can't think. I really can't think of any other artist who operates like this. You know.
There's
Maybe you
not
can,
many.
but they're not.
Yeah.
No, no, no.
There's not many. I think that, there are a few artists that have spanned the world of experimental music and more mainstream rock music. I think of Mike Patton. I think of Jim
Oh,
O'Rourke.
okay.
I think of Jim
Yeah,
O'Rourke. I think of
but they're not household names, they're not.
well,
No
neither am I.
disrespect. No,
Yeah, well, no,
no.
no,
But
no.
maybe Mike Patton could sell out the Albert Hall.
Yeah,
I
there
don't
you go.
know.
Mike Patton could headline, Wembley Arena with Faith No More,
Of course
and
he
and
could. Yeah, yeah.
and he'll go off and make a ridiculous noise album with Christian Finesse or.
Okay.
So there's an example. Yeah, but there's not too many of us. I
Yeah.
mean, I would say that someone like Brian Eno would be the poster child for that, in the sense that here's someone that kind of spans the world of, very, very big selling commercial music, pop and rock music. He's working with U2, he's working with Coldplay. And then at the same time, he's very much involved in the world of underground, more obscure underground experimental music. So he's kind of set the template in a way for that idea of genre hopping, and
Mm,
sees nothing strange in the idea of working with a big, mainstream artist and then going off and doing something much more kind of niche. And I
mm.
like that. And I've never thought that was strange. And I suppose what's strange to me, and I do acknowledge you're absolutely right, it is unusual, but it only seems unusual to me when I step back and kind of think about it. Well, that it is quite unusual to do what I do.
But other people
But
must tell you the same thing, that.
they do. And obviously in terms of career, it's fatal. It's
Yeah,
fatal.
yeah.
Well, not fatal. Obviously, it's not
No, no.
fatal, because
Obviously,
otherwise
yeah, something's
I
working.
wouldn't be sitting here. But it's a challenge,
Yeah.
because you are one of the things about being a professional musician in this world is this idea: you build a cult of personality, you build a
Mm,
following, you build a fan base, and that fan base tends to be based on the fact, tends to be predicated on the fact you make a certain kind of music that they like:
mm,
metal, R&B, hip hop, country, whatever it is you do.
mm,
That's what kind of brings them to you. If you go off as a rock artist and make a experimental noise record, it's a hard sell. It's a very hard
yeah, of
sell.
course.
But
Yeah.
like I said, I kind of like the challenge, and I think my audience, bless them, they've
Mm.
been pushed around a lot over the years. My audience, I
Uh,
think I think they've got used to the idea of not quite knowing what I'm going to do next, and perhaps they're a little bit careful. They check it out, but they don't automatically buy it. What's he done now? Okay, let's
yeah.
have a. Yeah, I like that. I'll buy that. No, that's not for me. Maybe that's the case. I don't know.
But
Yeah.
but that's great. I mean, even your last solo record, which I think has done really well, that's full of all kinds of different stuff. So
They're always a challenge. That every time I make a record, I mean, I'm very proud of the fact. Don't get me wrong, I'm extremely proud of the fact, but it has been. There's no doubt it's been a hindrance in some ways to my career. Is that I change with every record,
yeah,
and
yeah.
that's not really something you're supposed to do
No, of course
if
not.
if
No.
if you want to maintain a successful career, building and
Mm,
building and building. So I shed fans, I gain new fans, I lose some more fans, I gain some new fans.
mm.
But luckily, so far, it's kind of the balance has been enough for me to keep being able to do it. The
Yeah,
next
yeah.
record I'm working on right now is completely different again,
What's that? A
to
solo
the
record
harmony.
again?
Yeah, it's completely
Yeah.
different to the harmony code. It's just two long pieces. It's
Oh
like
wow.
completely
Okay.
different. So it's very willfully uncommercial, one might say. Yeah.
Right. Okay. I look forward. um, just to wrap things up, last question. Obviously, you have made it clear many times that you're hugely into early industrial music and noise and avant-garde and experimental electronic music. Who you've mentioned already a few artists, but who stands out for you in who stood out when you first discovered that kind of music? Who do you still buy records by? Who do you still keep up with from that sphere or those spheres of music, if
That's a
anybody?
good That's a good question. I don't think I have a an unswervable allegiance to anyone anymore. Well, I'll always buy anything Richard D. James, Aphex Twin puts out.
Okay.
But he so rarely releases anything now that
That's
that's
true.
not hard. It's like every 5 years you might get an EP. Um,
Mhm.
I don't think I have an allegiance to anyone in particular now. Historically, yes. So you asked the question about what really stood out for me at the
Yeah,
time, and what
and who you
I
kind
guess
of,
what
yeah, to the point where you think, yeah, I'm going to keep up with their work, and
select. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
So the first record I ever heard that was came from the industrial scene that really blew my mind was the original industrial
Mm,
record. So second annual report by Throbbing Gristle, which again my curiosity led me to it. My
mm,
curiosity led me to it. I can't remember where I bought it or when exactly, but it was like nothing else I'd heard, and it was punk. It was my punk
yeah,
because
yeah, yeah, yeah.
it's non-musicians and it's inspired non-musicians, and it's lo-fi, it's noisy, but it's also very ambitious. It's
Mm,
not dumbed down. It's asking a lot of the listener. It's playful. It's very Dadaist in the way, that they're playing with sound. And
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
I
Fantastic record.
that record blew my mind, and opened up the whole world really of industrial and noise music to me. So
Mm,
everything else kind of followed on from there. Your Cabaret Voltaires, your Soviet Francis, your
yeah,
Mertzbach, everything
yeah.
followed on from there. Which would have been a long process. But historically speaking, experimental music, Stockhausen, ever since getting those records out of the line, he still blows my mind what he was doing in the
Oh
1950s.
yeah, it's incredible.
And
Absolutely.
actually what his contemporaries were doing, not just him, but what all of those serious composers were doing in the 1950s. It was so far ahead of what, rock and roll was still rock around the clock. And
Yeah,
yet
yeah.
these guys were creating incredibly alien soundtracks.
Mm.
Um, I can't think of another way of saying it. So
Well, that's
classic,
right.
classic,
Yeah.
classical music was so far ahead of rock and roll for
Mm,
so long,
mm.
obviously, until you get to the late 60s, and then they start to assimilate. And
That's right.
anyway,
Yeah.
but so yeah, but I mean,
But there you.
again, over the years, I've been a big fan of Muslim Gauze or Tekka, most of the Warp electronic Warp acts, Gas, Wolfgang
Oh
Voigt,
yeah, yeah. Okay.
um, oh yeah, all that stuff.
No.
Anything with a degree of uniqueness to it, or
Mm.
something that I recognized that was different to all of it wasn't generic. I think that's the thing. This goes back to the beginning of our conversation. I'm always looking for something that doesn't sound like it's cookie cutter music. It's got to have something about it that's different to everything else, a
Yeah, but you
personality.
mentioned Muslim gauze, and a lot
Yeah.
that's quite samey. A lot of it.
Yes, it is samey, but any Muslim Gauze records doesn't sound like anyone else's record.
Okay.
That's my point. That Muslim Gauze within his catalogue made a lot of records that sounded similar to his other records. But
Mm,
my point is this: if you took any one Muslim Gauze record, it would not sound like any other artist on earth before
mm,
or since. He had a completely unique sound. Yes, he was
mm.
very prolific, and yes, he probably made too many records that were interchangeable, but they were only interchangeable with his own records. Do you understand what I
Okay.
mean?
Yeah,
You see what I'm
yeah,
saying? Yeah,
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 yeah. Of course.
yeah.
Maybe there's some crossover with Rapoon, but anyway.
Very little, very. I mean, I love Rapoon too, but Rapoon is more kind of spiritual,
Yeah, yeah,
more organic, more floaty. Muslim Gauze always had that sort of aggressive, um, you know,
yeah. It's kind of
almost punk
edge.
edge.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Okay. And I know you're because again, going back to your podcast, you were brandishing the 50 was it 50 CD Mersbo box set in a
yeah.
recent episode, and
Yeah.
does that mean you've got a hell of a lot of Mersbo as well? And do you keep up with
I
Mersbo?
I try to, but he's another artist where the albums become a little bit interchangeable,
Mm,
but they're only interchangeable with his own records. So he does have a sound which is very identifiable, I think.
yeah, yeah,
But he's incredibly prolific. I think he said his ambition was to make 1,000 albums before he dies or
that's right.
something. He must be well over halfway by now, I would think.
Oh, I'd
Yeah.
imagine so. Yeah. Even
and I
Sun
like
Ra didn't do that many.
even Sun Ra didn't do that many records. No.
No.
And I like Mott and I like noise music generally. I think I like the aesthetics of noise. I love noise incorporated into other music too.
Yeah, yeah.
So I love the way My Bloody Valentine and Sonic Youth used noise, you know.
Mm.
So that, and I've used noise in my own music quite a lot too. So I definitely like the aesthetics of noise, and I like the aesthetics of industrial music, and I like to incorporate it into my own music as well.
That was going to be, that was one of my, it was on my, I wrote a load of notes there. I'm so tired because I was up many times last night with our dog wanting to go in the
Wow,
garden. Yes, I'm
I know all
complete
about
zombie.
that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure you do. But that was actually a question, I'm sure, you know, there are points where you're taking ideas that you that would mostly be directed towards your base communion work, and you might then deploy similar ideas for porcupine tree. So there's a complete crossover with all of
Well,
this, or is there
yeah,
a distinct? Do you
I
try to
think
keep your song
no, I think I no,
porcupine tree work
well,
completely separate?
Porcupine Tree's only really made one album the last 15 years, but
Yeah,
certainly
yeah, okay.
certainly in my solo records, there's a lot of I always think of Bass Communion in a way as being R&D for just creating sounds, interesting sounds, sound
Mm,
design,
yeah.
production, learning new production techniques, learning, kind of expanding my toolbox of ways to
Mm,
twist sound and mutate sound. And yeah, absolutely. And that's always been applied, particularly in my solo work. My very first solo record, Insurgentes from 2008, used a lot of noise and a lot of dissonance
mm.
in ways that I wouldn't have done in Porcupine Tree, but certainly in my solo work, I've been able to incorporate a lot of that. And it kind of started with my experiments as bass communion. Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. So
okay.
yes, the
Yeah,
answer is
yeah.
absolutely, yeah, there's a lot of
Thought I could detect strands,
crossover.
in the last, in the harmony codex, there's definitely little
Definitely.
flecks. So,
Sure.
um, yeah, and I think we've kind of covered everything. Uh, oh, yeah, and my wife's back as well. So 1 minute. Sorry about that. So I think we've covered everything, Stephen, and thank you very much. Probably did have a couple of other questions, but I think. Oh, yeah, a last one to round things off. Um, Obviously, you're interested in sound design and soundtrack work. You have to my knowledge, you haven't done anything major in that direction at the moment, have you? So is that still
No,
waiting to happen?
it's been on my bucket list for years. The only thing I'd say now is be careful what you wish for, because I have so much going on in my life already and my
Yeah,
career. But actually, I would still love to, it would have to be the right project, the right movie. I don't want to, I don't want to do the score for, like Police Academy 7, or, I don't want to do for the sake of it.
yeah,
But I would love to do a score, work with an interesting director, and either a TV show. I'd love to. Yeah. I mean, it's, it's something that I think a lot of people have been surprised that I haven't done,
yeah,
because
yeah,
one of the words that gets used most in relation to my music is cinematic,
yeah,
and
absolutely, yeah.
I know
It's
why people say
screaming
that.
for for a film,
Yeah.
for a good
I've
film.
done I did a soundtrack to a computer game which was a lot of fun, which was mostly drawn from existing music, but it worked really well,
Mm,
I gained confidence from that. I thought, yeah, this is definitely, as my hunch always was, I would I would easily, I think, adapt. And I start actually, funny as I started my career, and there is something about the bass communion in this as well. I started my career when I became a professional musician to make ends meet for several years. I did music for TV commercials, and a
okay.
lot a lot of that is about sound design
Yeah, yeah,
and hitting marks, hitting events in the picture, with certain sounds and accentuating certain things on the screen, reflecting that in the music and the sound design. And I did that. That's kind of how I kept going in the early years when I wasn't making any money from my own music. So it's kind
okay.
of it's a part of my history. But no, I've never, frustratingly, I've not yet been invited to do a score.
Hopefully it will happen in due. soon
I would like
enough.
I would like to think I would do it eventually before I drop dead. Yeah, yeah. Way off yet.
Yeah, well, let's hope so. So you live quite a healthy lifestyle, don't you? I think so. So hopefully,
Yes,
you know,
yeah, yeah.
unlike me. So,
Anyway,
thank
oh,
you very
Richard,
much, Stephen. And
keep me
we'll be in
posted about when
touch.
the stock comes in. Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, we'll be in touch. Take care.
And I'll
Have a good
see you in
evening.
about a month anyway. Cheers,
Will
buddy.
do. Looking forward.
Bye now.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.